Hello, everybody. My name is Faith. I'm the host of the videocast Know Your Brain, and I'm very happy today to welcome Dr. Harry Stefanakis. He's a registered clinical psychologist who lives in Vancouver, and he's here today to talk about his new book, Core Hypnosis, a Compassion-Informed Therapy. So welcome, Dr. Stefanakis. I'm very happy to see you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So can you please just start by telling us about your background?
Sure. As you mentioned, a clinical psychologist in Vancouver. I have a private practice that I run here, mostly working with everyday issues from anxiety, depression, right through to trauma, violence issues, accidents, etc. I've also been involved very much in the writing community. So I write poetry and fiction as well, and use writing and creative works in my clinical work as well, and run trainings and workshops locally and internationally.
Okay. I always ask people, what was the topic of your PhD?
The topic of my PhD was desistance from violence. So how men stop using violence in their lives.
Oh, what a great topic.
hmm
Yeah.
That actually led to the initial parts of my career where I spent a lot of time working with offenders, working in the prison system as well. So I have worked in the prison system, and working with men to help them change their lives.
Okay. And but right now you're mostly doing private practice? Is that you're doing?
Correct. I'm mostly doing private practice. Yeah,
And your new book is called Core Hypnosis, a Compassion-Informed Therapy. So
that's right.
I know you have a copy of the book. Can you just hold it up so people can see it?
Sure. Here we go.
Okay, very nice cover. So can you tell us about the book?
Yeah, so the book Core Hypnosis, I've spent, I don't know, 20 years or so learning and utilizing clinical hypnosis. And of course, it's a very misunderstood um, uh, therapeutic style, and people often confuse it with stage hypnosis or what they see on TV, which is somewhat problematic. So I decided to write a book to help people understand the way in which I work with hypnosis and to help people understand clinical hypnosis in general.
Yeah.
And the compassion informed part is the second part of, kind of the work that I do is often compassion informed. So the two key themes really are attention, how we cultivate attention, and that's where the hypnosis part comes in, and how we utilize compassion to create the stage and through which our attention can be used most effectively to create positive, life-affirming change.
I'm going to tell my little Freud story. That Freud started with hypnosis and then moved away from it. But then at the end of his life, he said he felt that hypnosis would have to be added back in order to really address the mental health problems of the
Yeah,
patient.
I think if I recall correctly, Freud said the reason he went away from it was because he wasn't very good at using it, and others were better at using it, but he felt it was very powerful. And people really need to understand that hypnosis is really a natural neurophysiological phenomenon that all human beings experience. Um, and it helps activate neuroplasticity. I mean, that's what it's for.
Yeah.
Of course, you could also have negative trances, in which case the attention or focus that goes along with it uh, brings us into negative associations and fixates on those negative associations. But clinical hypnosis is really about cultivating attention in such a way that we activate our attention towards life-affirming positive choices and resources so that we can create positive change in our lives. Right. So hypnosis in general is really fundamentally, or the state of hypnosis, which I should distinguish from the use of hypnosis, of clinical hypnosis. The state of hypnosis is really focused attention.
Okay.
Um, it's often effortless focus. That is, you're not like concentrating in your focus. It's a state of focus that is effortless, and that your attention is really in a somewhat narrow frame. That is, it's focused on a particular type of experience, and other things go into the background. And within that context, you're more open to suggestion within the frame that you're focused in.
Hmm.
Okay. Which is why negative hypnosis or negative trance states can be problematic. When you're focused on a negative experience, you're also pulling in more information that is consistent with that, right?
Hmm.
Which is why we want to learn how to work with our attention and move it in a direction that is most effective for us rather than fixated in areas that are not effective.
Okay. So can you tell me a little bit about the first part of the title? It's called core hypnosis. What does the word core mean?
Right. So core comes from the first book I wrote, a self-help book called Core Living, which is also available on Amazon. Um, and when I was writing that book, I realized that I was using four sets of interrelated strategies consistently for all the work that I did. And core is an acronym that represents centering, opening, releasing, and extending. So, in essence, all the work requires some capacity to center. If we're not centered in our lives, we get knocked down by the first obstacle we face. And so learning how to ground ourselves, how to center, sets the stage for us to do everything and anything else that we want to do.
Mm-hmm.
O stands for opening the mindset. Sometimes we fixate on a problem or even on a goal, such that our viewpoint narrows down and we don't actually see possibilities. So strategies in opening the mindset are very useful here so that we can see more possibilities and options in our lives. R is for releasing. Sometimes we get fixated or we get locked into negative belief states or physiology. So what we call neuromuscular lock, your body and your brain get locked down in very narrow ways. We have negative beliefs about ourselves or about the world that limit our ability to act in the world. And so releasing those frees up energy to engage in the world more effectively. And E stands for extending effectively into the field of life, which for me involves three things. One, focusing on where you want to go, not what you're trying to avoid. Too often people focus on what they don't want. I don't want poverty. I don't want pain. I don't want suffering, as opposed to what they do want to create in their lives.
Yeah.
And the brain doesn't work with negation very well, with negatives. And so when you say, I don't want this, it actually activates the this, not the don't want.
You need to have a positively stated vision for your life. Yeah.
Exactly.
I love the acronym CORE because I've spoken to a lot of clinicians at my work, and the ones who do counseling, I always say to them, it always seems so amorphous to me, like vast. I'm like, how do you do it? What do you do? What's the goal?
Mhm.
And if they had just said CORE to me, I would have got it right away. Um,
Right.
these are the four things we need to work on, and then
Mhm.
we can see behavioral change. So the second part of your title is a compassion informed therapy. Can you talk a little bit of that part of about that part of the title?
Yeah, so compassion, I think, is fundamental to life. That, in fact, I've worked in the area of violence for many years, and people kind of wonder a little bit about how those two things dovetail together. And the truth is, from an evolutionary perspective, we're actually built to care for each other and connect with each other, not to destroy each other, right? In fact, we wouldn't have survived from an evolutionary perspective if we weren't actually built in some fundamental ways to connect with each other.
Yeah.
In fact, we have mirror neurons that activate in each other's brains to mirror what the other person is experiencing. Now, compassion sets the stage for which change can happen. It creates a safe enough space through which a safe surprise can be presented, right? So the place of change is a safe but not too safe place.
Yeah.
So the not too safe part is that surprise, that shift. But in order to allow for that to exist, you need that compassionate context such that a person is able to accept that surprise and allow that to create a shift.
I know this is a very basic kind of question, but I do think it's worth asking it. How would you define compassion? Because I think it's good that we all have a shared definition, and I think people kind of have slightly different ideas. So, what's your definition of compassion that you're using?
So compassion involves three things from my perspective. One is this empathic idea, that is that you can feel with another and that we're all connected in some particular way and that you can have some connection with another. The second part of it, unlike empathy, is that there is a desire to do something about that uh, experience. So you might notice suffering in another person. That's empathy. You might feel that suffering with them. That's the empathic part. And the compassion part that adds a layer to it is now I want to do something about that. I want to engage in such a way that the suffering for myself and others diminishes in this world, right? The third part for me is what I've often referred to as intelligent compassion, which is the idea that what that action is depends on the context and the situation. And so that when we're acting in a compassionate way, it's not always soft and gentle. And I'm not talking about um, sort of tough compassion, but I'm talking about the idea that what we do in the moment has to be appropriate for the context. Now, without the caring part, people sometimes say they're just, using, um, tough love, but they're actually just being mean,
Yeah.
right? So that's not what I mean. What I mean is that the caring part has to come across. Unless you have a connection with someone, sometimes being sharp with them will actually just be being mean to them and shut them down. But if you actually have a built-in connection, um, it means that they are able to receive that information in such a way that it shifts something in the experience. Can I give you an example?
I would love an example. Thank you.
So this is one in which I was working with an offender in the prison system. And he came into my office. He was coming in voluntarily, but really, he also wanted to get parole, and so it helps to do therapy. But I could tell early on that he was actually interested in change, but his stories kept repeating themselves. So he would continue to blame his partner and her family for all the problems in his life, even though the relationship had now ended 10 years. He would continue to blame her for all the challenges in his life, for why he was coming back to jail all the time. And, I worked very hard with him in the initial sessions to be empathic, to reflect, to sort of, you know, guide him into thinking about responsibility. And on the fifth session, when he started over again with the exact same story, I told him, look, you got to stop talking right now. My gut is completely clenching listening to you talking about how everyone else is to blame for your problems. And if my gut is clenching, I can only imagine how your body's feeling, like living the same way for 10 years. Right now, I think you need an emotional enema rather than any therapeutic intervention. And he was like, of course, that language of emotional enema was shocking to him. He's like, what? And I said, look, I can't actually even talk to you anymore at this moment because I'm so upset inside listening to this. And I need you to actually leave my office. And this was 5 minutes in.
It sounds like my mother scolding me about talking about one of my ex-boyfriends, but yeah, the same story.
But
She
then I
loves
said to
me,
him, look,
right? It came from a loving place.
yeah, like he knew that I was working with him. And I said, look, I don't think you're going to move forward in your life as long as you hold on to this. That's why you need this emotional enema. But right now, I can't work with you. Come back next week if you want to, and we can work again. But right now, I can't talk to you. And
Sure.
he did come back the following week and he said, okay, what's an emotional enema and does it hurt? And then we both laughed. And then we started doing work in earnest and he stopped using the blame. And so, what I mean by sharp compassion is at that moment, he needed to hear the honest truth
Yeah.
that the way in which he was living his life, the way in which he was thinking about his life was not working, right? The blame game that he was engaged in was only keeping him stuck. It was only creating his own suffering, right? And he was getting more blocked up and he couldn't move
Yeah.
forward. And so the metaphor, but also that sort of sharpness in this compassionate context allowed for change to happen.
So I'm just going to sort of summarize your definition of compassion, empathy plus action. And you said wisdom, but it sounds maybe like it's authenticity, like the wise use of truth.
Yes, that's a beautiful way of saying it. Yes, the wise use of truth.
Yeah. Sometimes you just got to say it like it is, right? So I'm just going to go back a little bit and say, like, why did you first become interested in hypnosis?
My interest in hypnosis began actually in my initial undergraduate studies of dreams and lucid dreaming. So I was always interested in this idea of altered states of consciousness. So lucid dreams are dreams in which you're awake while you're dreaming, and you're able to then utilize that state for both fun purposes, but also for therapeutic purposes. And initially, I studied the ways in which lucid dreams can be used to cultivate health and wellness. And it was fascinating work. However, of course, you have to teach people how to be lucid. And although it is a learnable skill, it's a lot more cumbersome. And then I was introduced at that time to hypnosis. And I thought, well, this is a way to do the same thing without having to wait for someone to be asleep to do
Are,
it. You can do it in the moment.
are you a very good lucid dreamer?
I was for a long time. I was able to lucid dream, and I can still activate lucid dreaming when I want to.
I've had lucid dreams, but I can't activate it. I don't have that. I can't do that. But it is a really cool feeling when you're lucid, when you're in a dream. Yeah.
Absolutely, it's a very powerful experience, but you can learn how to work with it and cultivate it more and more frequently.
But you thought that was related to hypnosis, and that's why you started to move into
Yeah, I
hypnosis.
thought this idea of altered states of consciousness and how we use consciousness would be a very powerful thing. And so I began to, when I was introduced to hypnosis, I began to explore it and to think about, okay, how does this work? You know, is it real? Is it fake? You know, what's actually going on? And I went through sort of the whole gamut of experiences from thinking this was fake to thinking, wow, this is magic. You know, this is pretty magical and cool to getting into, I would say, a more mature understanding of it. That, you know, this idea of shifting states of consciousness is actually quite normal. It's not so abnormal, even though stage hypnosis make it look like it's like unique and magical. It's really not that abnormal. It's a human ability. It's something that we all possess. And so it's really about how to invite people into a shift in state that is within their own natural capacity, and then utilizing that for positive purposes, right? And that's what clinical hypnosis is to me. So understanding that there is a state of experience, that we have capacities as human beings to shift our states of experience. And then clinical hypnosis is the practice where we use clinical skills, eh, especially the use of language in appropriate ways, not only to invite the shift in state, but then to utilize that shift in such a way that it promotes positive life affirming change.
Yeah, I'll just share a quick personal story. I have been to a counselor who used hypnosis, and I found it incredibly unique and powerful in a way that other things weren't. And like I had a huge emotional catharsis and a lot of feeling of, I guess, shaking in my body, and it was very visual and very physical. So I did find it very helpful. I mean, can you share just a story of one or two clients and how you used hypnosis to help them?
Sure. Uh, I was, I'll share a couple of examples. One is a very unique one, and the person came to me with trauma. This was a workplace accident. He was in an explosion in a construction site. He went flying, I understand, 10, 20 meters backwards. And then he had this repetitive traumatic nightmare. Every time we tried to approach the trauma, he would actually dissociate into his nightmare. Um, and the nightmare wasn't a complete replication of the accident because he actually didn't remember the accident. But he was basically climbing a ladder, you know, 10, 20 meters up in the air, and then the ladder would fall and he would go backwards, which replicated, in essence, the accident where the explosion happened and he went flying backwards. Now, you know, talking about negative trance, he was immediately go into a trance anytime he thought about the nightmare or talked about the trauma. His eyes would glaze over and he would be back in that same kind of contextual space. Now, the nightmare itself was having such a negative impact on him that he couldn't sleep, of course, which was affecting every other capacity to move forward. So I decided, well, we should work on the nightmare first. Um, and here, all I wanted to do was utilize the trance experience that he was naturally in every time we talked about it, but to begin to add positive resources into it. So the way that we worked here was that I would ask him to think about the nightmare. He would go into a negative trance, and then I would add a resource. So I would say, as you look up to the top of the ladder, you see a hand. And then I would uh, reorient him back into fully conscious state to get out of the nightmare. And we would do this repetitively. Back in, you see the hand, back out. Back in, you see the hand, back out. And as he gets to the top, I say, back in, you see the hand reaching down, and then we get back out. Go back in, you see the hand reaching down. Now, the second part was, or the third part was, now you're reaching your hand up to the hand reaching down, right? And the last part of this was to try to complete the whole um, nightmare was you're climbing to the top of the ladder. The hand is reaching down. You're reaching your hand out. So he's physically putting his hand out. And then as he was doing that, I grabbed his hand.
Oh,
And I held it as he was pulling back because, of course, the ladder was falling. And then I reoriented him back into a fully conscious state. We did that a few times until he had the visceral sense that not only was there a resource in place that he was supported, but he was being held. And after doing that for a few times, that particular nightmare disappeared. So again, adding the sense of resource within the trance state shifted his psychological experience. He was no longer stuck in this repetitive thematic nightmare where the accident in this particular version was reoccurring. He was able to add the resource, and as soon as that resource was established and in place neurologically, he no longer had the nightmare, which then allowed us to do more work. Of course, the trauma wasn't fully resolved at that point. However, now he was able to sleep and we were able to do more work. So that's one example.
Okay. If someone is a registered psychologist or a registered social worker or psychotherapist who's doing counseling, if they want to add hypnosis to their practice, like how should they pursue that? Like what kind of training would they get?
So there, in Canada, there are Canadian Societies of Clinical Hypnosis. There's an Ontario division, a BC division. There's one in Alberta. I'm not sure about all the other provinces, but we all offer training. And so there's in BC we have level 1 and level 2 training. And so after level 1 training, you get some basic skills that you can begin to apply immediately, and then level 2 is advanced skills that you can begin to apply. So the way you would learn any skill as a registered clinician is you do some reading, do some research, and you get training and supervised practice
Okay.
uh, would be the best way to do it.
So you mentioned a story, you just told the example of a story where someone was using it for nightmares or trauma. Can you talk about sort of the range of issues that you can use hypnosis with or that you do use hypnosis with?
Right. I mean, it could be used for depression, for anxiety, um, um, for work-life balance. For example, in one case, I was working with this one individual who was stuck between this desire to play with his son and spend time with him and his need to make money and feel responsible for his family's financial future. And he was stuck in this kind of psychological dilemma where he felt like he was working too hard, but every time he stopped working, to spend more time with his family, he felt guilty that he wasn't making enough money and he was a realtor, or he is a realtor. And so he felt like if he wasn't on, right, then his family would suffer financially. And so what we did is we took the two parts, the play and the responsible part, and he held them sort of symbolically in his hand and worked with each one symbolically to identify the positive and challenging elements of each. And we created these sort of symbolic representations in his imagination for each of these, and he actually physically, in a sense, held them.
Mhm.
And so we anchored them symbolically, and then we created an integration exercise where he was able to symbolically bring them together and see what new thing developed from holding them together. As he was able to integrate these two pieces, we would then work again hypnotically on what life looked like from the perspective of this integration. And then he was able to use his own creative intelligence to come up with ways in which these two things were not diametrically opposed, but could be integrated in a meaningful way for a living experience in his own life.
Do you think hypnosis sort of opens people in a way that allows them to be more creative and use that creativity?
Yes, because, on the one hand, we have the sort of very conscious uh, thinking process that is very useful, but is also very effortful. We have subconscious processes that unfold automatically, right? That we've sort of neurologically wired in or have been, some of them come pre-wired, but we also wire in habits, right? So that it takes less effort to do things. Otherwise, of course, we couldn't chew gum and walk at the same time if everything had to be fully conscious. And hypnotic states are kind of integrated state between the conscious and the subconscious. So we get
Mhm.
into this effortless focus that allows the creative space, the subconscious space we open into that space without sort of the critical filters getting in the way. That allows us then to sort of, again, broaden our perspective such that we see more possibilities. So in a sense, it is a very creative space, but also a very action-oriented state. So if you think about artists or athletes who enter into the zone, they open up not only create a space, but also action through that space.
Have you always used hypnosis in your practice, or is it something you added in later?
Uh, because I learned it while I was still a graduate student, I've always used it. I've evolved in how I use it. Now I think about the use of language and symbolism more broadly. And even when I'm not doing any sort of formal hypnosis, that is a formal induction into a shifting state, I realize that even telling a story is an induction, like that we are already connected in some particular way when we're sharing stories and metaphors, that in itself is hypnotic work. And the way in which language works when used properly, rich language activates not only linguistic centers in the brain, but also the sensory, the motor, and the affective. So um, language is not only communicative, it's transformative when used properly. And so training in clinical hypnosis really teaches one how to use language effectively that way.
The use of stories and metaphors in therapy is really an interesting topic.
hmm Yeah, absolutely. And in my book, I do have a whole section on metaphor and story, also a section on poetry, because I do believe that the language used in poetry is language that is a way of using language to go beyond language, right? To go deeper into those effective, bottom-up experiences. And I often share poems or create poems with clients as well to promote an opening in the mindset, to help release, and to help create possibilities.
Can you tell me a little bit about the arc of your book? Like, is it divided into sections?
So the core hypnosis book is divided into sections. It's the sections, other than the introduction and the conclusion, which puts it all together. So there's a section at the end where I sort of run the core gamut, but then it's basically a section on centering, a section on opening, a section on releasing, and then a section on extending, and then a section that puts it all together and then talks about some of the other things that we want to pay attention to, whether it's ethical issues, moral issues, how to use self-hypnosis, et cetera, or how to teach self-hypnosis. So there's that. That's the arc of that particular book with examples, case examples in each section. Again, recognizing that the core framework is not sort of discrete. So when we do centering activities, we're not just only centering, we're often opening it. We can be opening and releasing. But the emphasis is on centering, right? When we're doing opening strategies, we're not just opening, we're often also releasing, right? You can't really open something without also letting go of something, right?
Yeah. So there's a section in the book on poetry. I know that you also write some poems. Could you talk a little bit about that? Or also talk about your work, but also the use of poetry in therapy.
I'm sorry, you cut out there for 1 second.
Oh,
I didn't.
can you talk about your poetry and also the use of poetry in therapy?
Absolutely. So I've been writing poetry for years. I was actually introduced to poetry, well, in many different ways, but one ways in which I was introduced to it in therapeutic settings was actually at a training I did with one of my teachers in clinical hypnosis, Stephen Gilligan. He would use it in his teaching. And I found it really powerful.
Yeah.
And then it became interesting to me because I started thinking about how I would use it in my teaching, which I started to incorporate in when I was running workshops. But then I realized that I could also use it therapeutically. There's no distinction there, right? And I started beginning to use poems that I thought would be effective for particular clients that would maybe open up their mindset or surprise them in some way. And I found that it had an additive effect. And as I evolved in my own kind of creative writing, I decided to begin to write poems with clients who were so inclined. And so we would write poems together about their particular issue, a way of opening some insight or documenting
Yeah.
uh, their experiences and their changes.
I think like poetry, it brings about an integration, like you talked about before, and that's so much what we need to do psychologically is to integrate because the language part of it is very left-brained. All that's coming from your left brain, but the metaphor part is right-brained. So when we
hmm
put those together, it brings together the two parts of ourselves, and then we're fully using our whole self, as we do things. So yeah, poetry I think is so powerful. And I know poetry, I heard one lady say that poetry saved her life.
Absolutely, it can be one of the most powerful things that we can do. And actually, my most recent book, which is Words That Mend, this way,
I can see.
uh, Verses in Resilience and Renewal, is a set of uh, poems that I wrote for clients or with clients. So specific therapeutic poems. They were written in therapeutic space as part of healing and also as part of renewal and integration.
Yeah. Could you read us a poem? Is there one that you'd like to read?
I can read you the introductory poem, which I wrote for all my clients, which is on hope.
Oh,
And if you're interested, I can read you one poem I wrote for a client as well.
sure, two poems is great.
Hope. Hope is not a word spoken into emptiness, not a prayer that waits for an answer. It is not stillness nor blind belief that gambles on the turning wind. Hope is simpler. It is the small green shoot breaking open the stone. It is the sea insisting, wave by wave, that the shore remember its name. Hope is the whisper of light through the tightest crack, the hush of dawn as it unfolds across the darkened hills. It is the heart, wounded and shattered, opening itself to the sun, the place where pain becomes passage, where light does not ask permission to enter. For even in the deepest wound, light insists, and what insists cannot be defeated.
Hmm. Okay. And what's the second poem?
So this poem was written for a client who had experienced, various levels of trauma in her life and had moved through most of it, was still struggling with one issue that she was working to resolve. But I wanted to document all the ways in which she had grown and evolved and been able to document her strength and resilience. And we used metaphors here that were so one of the things that I do with clients around poetry is I'll ask them to describe their experiences, describe their challenges, describe their strength, using often metaphors. What is it like? Um, and then utilizing those in the poem so that, of course, it has a very strong resonance to them. And for her, water was important, and cedar and nature became important. So you'll see those incorporated into the poem. This one is called Apprenticeship to Freedom. No longer the iron tooth in a wheel, fixed to duty not my own.
Hmm.
I give myself to the waves, that old metronome of the body, rising, falling, the sea teaching presence with every unarguable breath. I am here, or else I am swimming towards the bright table of my life. It is the same. Night, as it was meant to be, puts down the burdens of the day. Ah, what beautiful sleep. And day, unburdened, is light, held lightly, weightless, and still grounded. So I apprentice myself to cedar, green persistence, weathered grace, but does not hurry to become soil. My bones remember height, grow ethereal as feathered bird bones, fit for confidence in the tallest branches. Or am I the cedar craft on the river, a vessel given by grace, oars of purpose, current for companion? I take the water's way, not to conquer, but to consent, to meet what comes as if I had been expecting it all along. This is the journey. Discovery not as a map, but as the next right reach of the arm. New challenges at the bow. I take them one by one, step by faithful step. Strength arriving the way the morning does, quietly, without announcements. And success is not a summit, but a widening, where joy is the ocean speaking, and I am, at last, listening.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
It sounds like she's going to be okay. That's what it
Yes.
sounds like to me.
Yes.
Um, what a beautiful image of the water and the wood, of the polarity of that,
Hmm.
the openness and the flexibility of water and the strength of the wood,
Hmm.
and the quiet and the listening. Mm.
And cedar itself is a quite a resilient wood. It doesn't rot very easily. It is able to hold itself
I always
quite.
think of that beautiful smell that it has.
Hmm.
Like I can smell it now. So it's really
Hmm.
beautiful.
And
Um,
so what you just said, though, is an important point, right? That you had a visceral experience very much to the poem. And this is what we're talking about here, the way in which poetry reaches us very viscerally. The sensory cortex gets activated. You're not only having, you're not listening to it just from the words, you're listening to it from a whole body perspective,
yeah.
right?
And do you think hypnosis does that? It makes it a full body experience, whereas more of a traditional talk therapy doesn't?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so
If
much
we
of it,
just have, yeah.
yeah.
If we're just having a literal conversation, a very, CBT kind of conversation, it can be very, very useful and powerful because consciously we can do a lot of things. But people can feel disconnected from the sense of truth. They will say to me often, I know this is true, but I don't feel it.
Yeah, and it didn't bring change. Because
Right.
so much of the pain is in our body. Like if someone beat you, you know,
Yes.
it, that's, a physical
Yes, we carry memory, as many authors have written, in the body. The body remembers. And we need to work with change, not only from the top down, but also from the bottom up.
Yeah.
And of course, in an integrated way, which is where clinical hypnosis comes in, I think, very handy.
Yeah. I think clinicians really need to look more at hypnosis and use it more. One of my friends is a psychotherapist, and I said, have you ever had a client who's like your star client who had some big, because I want to hear the story, right? I said, tell me one of your big success stories. And she thought of it and she said, I don't have one. And I thought, oh, that was terrible. So I thought there must be something missing from the field, right? So it's not that she's not, you know, well trained or well intentioned, but I just think, yeah, there's like something missing when you don't bring like a more of a like what you're saying, like a body practice into it, or like a
Mhm.
something else. Yeah.
Yeah, I do believe that an integrated practice is really important. So both top down and bottom up, and in a way, in ways in which one can combine those two, where as they say, the sum is greater than, or the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Hmm. So, what social media do you have, like websites or other things?
Yeah, I have two websites, corepsychology.net, which is my professional site, and then hstefanakis.com, which is my author site, where you'll see all my books, from the psychology books, the fiction, the poetry, even one children's book that I've written is in there. So that's where you could find my books, and they each link to each other. I am on Instagram, LinkedIn, and I guess Twitter as well. Although I'm not a big social media person, so I don't um,
Post a lot?
post that much up there. But if you want to follow me on those sites, one can as well.
Okay. So I'll put your websites in the description below. And where can people buy your book?
The Core Hypnosis book you can buy through Friesen Press directly. I think Indigo has it at almost the same price. Um, and Words of That Man you can find on Amazon. You
Okay.
can find Core Hypnosis on Amazon as well, but I think they're selling it at a markup that last time I checked that was surprised me. So I'm not sure that's the best place for it. I would check Friesen Press directly.
You have to check the shipping prices too, because it probably works out about the same with the shipping price, but I would let people check
Oh,
that
okay.
themselves.
Right.
So,
So that's a good point.
yeah, okay. So I want to thank you for talking to me today. It was very interesting. And I would just encourage people to buy the book if they're interested in adding hypnosis to their practice or learning more about the core model. So,
Hmm.
all right.
Absolutely. Thank you.